The silver cake server trembled in my 8-year-old daughter Emma's small hands as my mother-in-law Margaret Thompson's voice cut through the birthday party chatter like a blade. "Oh, honey, did you actually make this yourself?" she asked with that particular tone that somehow managed to sound sweet while dripping with condescension. Emma's rainbow layer cake, painstakingly crafted over 3 days with every ounce of love and determination her little heart could muster, suddenly looked small and imperfect under Margaret's critical gaze. "It's so rustic," she continued, her manicured finger pointing at the slightly uneven frosting. "I suppose it's the thought that counts, even when the execution falls short." The room fell silent as Emma's face crumpled, her proud smile dissolving into hurt confusion. What Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been quietly building something extraordinary while she dismissed my daughter's dreams as amateur hour. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Margaret Thompson's immaculate Riverside Heights estate, casting geometric shadows across her pristine marble countertops. Everything in Margaret's kitchen gleamed with the kind of perfection that came from having a housekeeper who understood that even the slightest smudge was unacceptable. I stood in the doorway holding Emma's cake carrier, watching my daughter bounce excitedly beside me, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break over her innocent enthusiasm. "Mama, do you think Grandma Maggie will love my surprise cake?" Emma whispered, tugging at the hem of her favorite yellow sundress. She'd insisted on wearing it today because she said it matched the buttercream roses she'd spent hours perfecting yesterday evening. At 8 years old, Emma possessed the kind of boundless optimism that still believed everyone would celebrate her efforts with the same joy she felt in creating them. I smoothed her dark curls and smiled, though something in my chest tightened with maternal protectiveness. "She's going to be amazed, sweetheart. You worked so hard on making it perfect." And she had. For 3 days, Emma had transformed our modest kitchen into her personal bakery laboratory, measuring ingredients with scientific precision, testing flavor combinations, and practicing her piping techniques until her little fingers were stained with food coloring. The cake itself was a masterpiece of childhood ambition. 6 layers of rainbow sponge cake, each tinted a different pastel shade, separated by vanilla buttercream and fresh strawberries. Emma had watched 17 YouTube tutorials to learn how to make the buttercream roses that decorated the top, and she'd practiced on parchment paper until she could create them with steady, confident movements. The slight imperfections that marked it as homemade only made it more precious to me, evidence of her determination and creativity. "Sarah, there you are!" Margaret's voice rang out from the living room, carrying that particular note of controlled impatience that suggested we were already failing to meet her expectations. Everyone's been waiting for the birthday girl to make her grand entrance. Emma practically vibrated with excitement as we made our way through Margaret's showcase home, past the professionally arranged floral displays and strategically placed family photographs that told the story of Thompson family success. The living room buzzed with conversation as Margaret's carefully curated guest list mingled over champagne and catered hors d'oeuvres. These weren't intimate family gatherings, but rather social performances where every detail from the imported cheese selection to the playlist reflected Margaret's impeccable taste and substantial budget. My husband David caught my eye from across the room where he stood trapped in conversation with his Uncle Harold about stock market fluctuations. His apologetic smile conveyed what we both knew, that family gatherings at his mother's house always carried an undercurrent of evaluation and judgment. David had learned long ago to navigate these waters by staying safely neutral, a survival strategy that sometimes left me feeling like I was facing Margaret's scrutiny alone. "Oh my goodness, is this Emma's famous creation?" Margaret's sister Patricia approached us with the kind of exaggerated enthusiasm that adults often employed when addressing children's efforts. "I've heard so much about this mysterious cake, Project. Emma beamed, carefully lifting the clear plastic cover from her cake carrier. I made it all by myself. Well, Mama helped me reach the high shelves, but I did all the mixing and decorating. Look at the roses. She pointed proudly at each buttercream flower, explaining her color choices and technique with the confidence of someone who had truly mastered a new skill. The cake stood about 8 inches tall, its pastel rainbow layers visible through the glass sides of the carrier. The buttercream roses cascaded across the top in shades of pink, yellow, and lavender, interspersed with delicate, green leaves that Emma had fashioned using a special tip she'd ordered online with her allowance money. Around the base, she'd piped a border of tiny rosettes in alternating colors, creating a festive foundation that tied the whole design together. How lovely, Patricia murmured, though I caught the subtle glance she exchanged with her husband. It was the look adults shared over children's heads when they wanted to communicate amusement without dampening youthful enthusiasm. You're quite the little baker, aren't you, Emma? Before Emma could respond, Margaret materialized beside us with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to commanding social situations. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and perfectly tailored navy slacks, her silver hair styled in the kind of precise bob that required weekly salon maintenance. Everything about Margaret projected controlled elegance, from her understated but expensive jewelry to her immaculate manicure that never showed a chip despite her active social calendar. Well now, let's see what all the fuss is about, Margaret announced, her voice carrying across the room with enough authority to draw everyone's attention. Conversations paused as the gathered family members turned toward us, creating an impromptu audience for Emma's moment of presentation. Emma's face glowed with pride as she carefully lifted her cake from its carrier and placed it on Margaret's marble serving island. The afternoon light illuminated every detail of her work, highlighting both the genuine artistry and the charming imperfections that marked it as the creation of determined 8-year-old hands. I used 6 different colors, Emma explained, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her favorite subject. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And I made the buttercream from scratch because Mama taught me that real bakers make everything themselves. The roses took me 3 hours yesterday, but I wanted them to be perfect for your birthday, Grandma Maggie. Margaret circled the cake. Slowly, her expression unreadable as she examined Emma's work from every angle. The room remained unusually quiet, family members sensing the weight of this moment without quite understanding why. I found myself holding my breath, hoping that, for once, Margaret might set aside her perpetual need for perfection and simply celebrate her granddaughter's effort and love. "Oh, honey," Margaret finally said, her tone carrying that particular combination of sympathy and condescension that she'd perfected over decades of social interactions. "Did you actually make this yourself? All by yourself?" Emma nodded eagerly, still glowing with pride and completely missing the subtle shift in Margaret's tone. "Yes, I followed the recipe exactly, and I practiced the roses until I could make them without looking. Mama said you'd be so surprised because you always buy your cakes from that fancy bakery downtown." "It's so rustic," Margaret continued, her manicured finger hovering over one of the buttercream roses that was slightly larger than the others. "I suppose it's the thought that counts, even when the execution falls a bit short of professional standards." The words hit the room like ice water. Emma's radiant smile began to falter as she processed Margaret's tone, her 8-year-old mind struggling to understand how her grandmother's words could sound kind while making her feel so small. I watched my daughter's confidence crumble in real time, her shoulders sagging as she looked down at her creation with newly critical eyes. "Of course, homemade has its own charm," Margaret added with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "It reminds me of those craft projects you used to bring home from school, David. Remember those ashtrays you made in pottery class? Completely lopsided, but we displayed them anyway because you were so proud." The comparison was devastating in its casual cruelty. David's face flushed with embarrassment, caught between loyalty to his mother and protection of his daughter. The other family members shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to acknowledge the awkwardness or pretend they hadn't noticed the barb. "Actually, Margaret," I found myself saying, my voice steadier than I felt. "Emma's cake represents weeks of planning and practice. She researched techniques, perfected her recipes, and demonstrated incredible patience and skill for someone her age." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly at my gentle correction, a flash of surprise that I'd chosen to speak up rather than simply absorb her criticism silently. "Oh, I'm sure she worked very hard," she replied smoothly. "It's just that when you're accustomed to professional quality, homemade efforts can look a bit amateur by comparison." Emma's lower lip began to tremble as she stared at her cake, seeing it now through Margaret's dismissive lens rather than her own proud perspective. All those hours of careful work, all that love and determination, reduced to amateur effort that fell short of professional standards. The butterfly decorations she'd crafted with such care suddenly seemed childish. The slightly uneven layers, obvious flaws rather than charming character. "I think it's beautiful," said Jessica Rodriguez, my best friend who'd arrived fashionably, late, and caught only the tail end of Margaret's commentary. Jessica worked as a graphic designer and had an artist's eye for genuine creativity. "Emma, the color gradation is gorgeous, and those roses show real technical skill. You should be incredibly proud," but the damage was done. Emma's face had already absorbed Margaret's judgment, her excitement transformed into hurt confusion. She looked up at me with eyes that asked why her grandmother didn't love something she'd created with such joy, why her best effort wasn't enough to earn the praise she'd anticipated. "Maybe we should cut it now," Margaret suggested briskly, producing an elegant silver cake server from her drawer. "I'll get some plates, and we can all have a taste. I'm sure it's perfectly edible, even if the presentation isn't quite bakery standard." The final insult wrapped in practical suggestion. Margaret's willingness to serve Emma's cake felt less like acceptance and more like charitable tolerance, a gracious hostess making the best of an inadequate offering. As she began cutting precise slices, her movements carried the efficiency of someone eager to move past an uncomfortable moment and return to more suitable entertainment. I put my arm around Emma's shoulders, feeling her small body trembling with suppressed tears. At 8 years old, she was still young enough to believe that love and effort should naturally result in appreciation and praise. Margaret's response had shattered that innocent expectation, introducing her to the harsh reality that some people measured worth by standards that had nothing to do with heart or intention. "Your cake is absolutely perfect," I whispered into Emma's ear, meaning every word. Grandma Maggie just doesn't understand how special homemade things are. But even as I offered comfort, anger burned in my chest. Not just at Margaret's cruelty, but at my own years of silence in the face of her subtle put-downs and dismissive comments. How many times had I absorbed her criticism without response, teaching Emma through my passivity that Margaret's judgments were acceptable and her standards reasonable? What Margaret didn't know, what none of them suspected as they politely sampled Emma's cake with carefully neutral expressions, was that I'd been quietly building something extraordinary while she dismissed our efforts as amateur hour. For the past 2 years, I'd been developing my own expertise in ways that Margaret's narrow worldview couldn't recognize or appreciate. During Emma's nap time and after her bedtime, I'd transformed our garage into a professional-grade test kitchen. What had started as support for Emma's baking interest had evolved into serious culinary education as I discovered my own natural talent and passion for pastry arts. I'd completed online courses from culinary institutes, practiced techniques, until my muscle memory matched that of trained professionals, and developed original recipes that combined classical methods with innovative approaches. My Instagram account, which I'd kept deliberately separate from family connections, had attracted over 50,000 followers who appreciated my detailed tutorials and creative flavor combinations. Food bloggers had begun reaching out for collaboration, opportunities, and just last month, I'd received an invitation to audition for a competitive baking show that would film next spring. But more importantly, I'd been quietly documenting Emma's progress and potential with videos that showcased her genuine talent and remarkable intuitive understanding of flavor and texture. Her rainbow cake wasn't amateur work disguised as professional effort. It was the creation of a child prodigy whose natural abilities far exceeded her chronological age. As Margaret continued distributing slices of Emma's cake with the resigned air of someone making the best of a disappointing situation, I made a decision that would change everything. No more silence. No more allowing Margaret's narrow standards to define worth or potential. Emma deserved better than tolerance disguised as acceptance. The war Margaret had just declared with her casual cruelty was about to become very real, and she had no idea what she'd unleashed with her dismissive assessment of a little girl's dreams. 3 days after Margaret's birthday disaster, I was still replaying the scene in my mind when my phone buzzed with an unexpected message. The sender's name made me pause mid-sip of my morning coffee. Isabella Chen, owner of the Golden Whisk Bakery, the most prestigious artisan bakery in Riverside Heights. Isabella's establishment was legendary in our community, the kind of place where wedding cakes started at $2,000 and required booking 6 months in advance. Ms. Martinez, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I obtained your contact information from the Maplewood Elementary Parent Directory. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this week to discuss your daughter Emma's exceptional work. My heart skipped several beats as I read the message twice, then a third time to make sure I wasn't imagining things. Isabella Chen knew who Emma was. More importantly, she considered Emma's work exceptional. The timing felt surreal, coming so soon after Margaret's crushing dismissal of Emma's abilities. I glanced toward the living room where Emma sat cross-legged on the carpet, sketching cake designs in her notebook with the same focused intensity she'd applied to everything since discovering her passion for baking. Since Margaret's party, she'd thrown herself even deeper into her craft, as if trying to prove to herself that her grandmother's harsh words hadn't diminished her love for creating beautiful things. "Mama, look at this," Emma called, holding up her latest drawing. She'd designed a 3-tier wedding cake decorated with sugar flowers that cascaded down one side like a waterfall. The level of detail in her sketch was remarkable for an 8-year-old, showing not just artistic vision, but genuine understanding of structural engineering and design principles. "That's breathtaking, sweetheart," I replied, still staring at Isabella's message in disbelief. "The proportions are perfect, and I love how you've balanced the visual weight of the flowers." Emma beamed at the praise, her resilience in the face of Margaret's criticism both heartbreaking and inspiring. Children possessed such remarkable ability to bounce back from cruelty, especially when they had someone in their corner who truly believed in their potential. What they couldn't always do was protect themselves from the lingering doubt that cruel words planted in developing minds. I typed back quickly before I could second-guess myself. "Ms. Chen, I would be honored to meet with you. Would Thursday morning work? I'm very curious about your interest in Emma's work." Her response came within minutes. "Thursday at 10 would be perfect. Please come to the bakery through the back entrance on Maple Street. I'd prefer to keep our conversation private for now. There are some opportunities I'd like to discuss that might benefit from discretion initially." The mention of opportunities and discretion sent my pulse racing. Isabella Chen didn't waste time on casual conversations about 8-year-old bakers, unless something significant was developing. What could she possibly want to discuss that required privacy and back entrance meetings? That evening, as I tucked Emma into bed surrounded by her collection of baking magazines and recipe notebooks, she looked up at me with those serious dark eyes that sometimes seemed too wise for her age. "Mama, do you think I'm really good at baking, or are you just saying that because you're my mom?" The question gutted me. Margaret's careless cruelty had planted exactly the kind of doubt I'd feared, making Emma question not just her abilities, but the authenticity of the support she received from people who truly loved her. Emma, sweetheart, being your mom means I want what's best for you, which includes being honest about your abilities. If you weren't genuinely talented, I wouldn't encourage you to spend so much time and energy on baking. I'd help you find something else you were naturally good at. She considered this with the careful logic of a child who'd learned to think things through completely. But Grandma Maggie said my cake was amateur and rustic. Those aren't good things, are they? I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. Grandma Maggie has very specific ideas about what makes things valuable. She tends to think that expensive means better and professional always beats homemade. But that's not always true, especially in creative fields like baking. What do you mean? Well, some of the most famous chefs in the world started by cooking with their grandmothers in tiny kitchens, not in fancy culinary schools. Some of the most beautiful art comes from people who never went to art school but had natural talent and passion. Professional training is wonderful, but it can't create the spark that makes someone truly special at something. Emma absorbed this quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on her comforter. Do you think I have the spark? I think you have one of the brightest sparks I've ever seen, I answered truthfully. And I think other people are starting to notice it too. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I drove through downtown Riverside Heights, past the boutique shops and artisan coffee houses that catered to our community's refined tastes. The Kai, Golden Whisk Bakery occupied a corner building that had been converted from a Victorian mansion, its wraparound porch and elaborate gingerbread trim making it look like something from a fairy tale. The back entrance Isabella had specified led through a small courtyard garden where herbs grew in neat rows between decorative stone pathways. Even the utilitarian entrance to her bakery reflected the kind of thoughtful attention to detail that had made Isabella's reputation legendary throughout the region. Isabella herself answered the door, and I was struck immediately by how different she appeared from the polished professional image I'd seen in magazine features about her bakery. Wearing a flour-dusted apron over casual clothes, her long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she looked more like a dedicated craftsperson than a business owner whose clientele included celebrities and politicians. "Sarah, thank you so much for coming," she said, gesturing me into a workspace that took my breath away. The back kitchen of the Golden Whisk was a temple to serious baking, with commercial-grade ovens, marble work surfaces, and equipment that probably cost more than most people's cars. But what struck me most was how lived-in it felt, how every surface showed evidence of constant creative use rather than pristine display. "Please, sit down." Isabella indicated a small table near a window that overlooked her herb garden. "I've made us some coffee, and I hope you'll try these new lavender scones I've been developing." As she arranged pastries and poured coffee from a French press, I tried to guess what this meeting could possibly be about. Had Emma done something at school that involved baking? Was Isabella considering some kind of junior program that might include younger students? "I'm sure you're wondering why I wanted to meet," Isabella began, settling across from me with her own cup. "The truth is, your daughter has been brought to my attention in a rather extraordinary way." My confusion must have shown clearly on my face because she smiled and continued. 3 weeks ago, I was judging a regional culinary competition for amateur bakers. One of the other judges was Chef Antoine Dubois. You might know him from his television shows. During a break in judging, Antoine showed me some videos on his phone that had been sent to him by a food blogger he follows. My heart began racing as the pieces clicked into place. Emma's baking videos. I'd been documenting her progress and posting them on my food Instagram account, never imagining they might reach beyond our small following of local food enthusiasts. The videos showed a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, demonstrating advanced techniques with remarkable skill and intuitive understanding. Antoine was fascinated because the child showed natural abilities that he rarely sees even in culinary school students. Isabella paused to sip her coffee, studying my expression. That little girl was Emma, wasn't it? I nodded, still processing the implications. I've been documenting her progress, but I never imagined professional chefs might see the videos. Sarah, what your daughter demonstrated in those videos isn't typical childhood interest in baking. She shows genuine prodigy-level intuition for flavor combinations, structural engineering, and artistic presentation. The way she adjusts techniques on the fly and explains her reasoning process suggests she understands baking at a molecular level that usually takes years of professional training to develop. The validation was overwhelming after years of wondering if I was being an overly enthusiastic parent, seeing extraordinary talent where others might see normal childhood creativity. But hearing it from someone of Isabella's caliber, someone who worked with professional bakers daily, transformed my private suspicions into confirmed reality. Antoine and I would like to invite Emma to participate in something quite special, Isabella continued. Next month, there's a junior division being added to the annual Riverside Baking Championship. It's specifically designed for young bakers, between ages 8 and 12 who show exceptional promise. I nearly choked on my coffee. The annual Riverside Baking Championship was one of the most prestigious culinary competitions in our region, drawing professional bakers from across 3 states. The idea that they were creating a junior division, and that Emma was being personally invited to participate, seemed almost too incredible to believe. The junior division will be judged by the same panel of professional chefs who evaluate the adult competitors, including Antoine. The winner receives a full scholarship to summer intensive programs at the Culinary Institute, plus mentorship opportunities with established pastry chefs. My mind raced with possibilities and concerns. This was exactly the kind of recognition Emma deserved, the validation of her extraordinary abilities by people who truly understood what they were seeing. But it was also a massive public platform where failure would be visible to hundreds of spectators and potentially thousands more if the local television coverage included the junior division. What would the competition involve? I asked, trying to balance excitement with practical considerations. 3 challenges over 2 days. First, a technical challenge where competitors must execute a classic recipe with their own creative variations. Second, a presentation challenge focused on artistic decoration and design innovation. Finally, a signature challenge where they create an original recipe that demonstrates their personal style and technical mastery. Each challenge sounded perfectly suited to Emma's particular combination of technical skill and creative vision. She'd been developing original recipes for months, and her artistic abilities had progressed to the point where her decorative work rivaled that of professional cake decorators. Isabella, this sounds like an incredible opportunity, but I have to ask, why the personal invitation? Surely there are other young bakers who might be interested. She smiled, and I caught a glimpse of the passionate educator beneath the successful business owner. Honestly, Emma's videos reminded me of myself at that age. I was 8 when I first realized I understood baking in ways that felt almost magical. My grandmother recognized my talent and fought to get me opportunities to develop it, despite people who thought I was too young or that baking wasn't a serious pursuit for a gifted child. The parallel felt profound and a little overwhelming. Emma wasn't just being offered a competition opportunity. She was being offered mentorship from someone who'd walked a similar path and achieved extraordinary success. There's one more thing, Isabella added, her expression becoming slightly more serious. The competition will be quite public. Local media coverage, community attendance, social media documentation. If Emma participates and performs well, it will likely draw attention from people who might not understand or appreciate what they're seeing. The warning was diplomatically phrased, but I understood exactly what she meant. Margaret and others who'd dismissed Emma's abilities as childish Amateur efforts would be forced to confront evidence of her genuine talent in a very public forum. The validation would be sweet, but the social complications could be significant. "I'd like to discuss this with Emma and my husband before making any decisions," I said carefully. "But Isabella, thank you for seeing Emma's potential and thinking of her for this opportunity. Regardless of what we decide, knowing that professional chefs recognize her talent means more than you can imagine." As I drove home, my mind buzzed with possibilities and concerns in equal measure. Emma deserved every opportunity to develop her extraordinary abilities, but she also deserved protection from the kind of adult politics and social dynamics that could turn her passion into a source of stress and pressure. The real question wasn't whether Emma was ready for this level of competition. It was whether our family was prepared for the aftermath of her inevitable success. That evening, as David helped Emma with her math homework at the kitchen table, I found myself studying the dynamics that had shaped our family's relationships over the past 3 years of marriage. Margaret's dismissal of Emma's cake hadn't occurred in a vacuum. It was the culmination of countless small moments where she'd established herself as the arbiter of acceptable standards and achievements within our extended family circle. The pattern had been set from the beginning of my relationship with David. Margaret approached every family interaction as an opportunity to reinforce hierarchies and demonstrate her position as the family's cultural and social leader. She wasn't intentionally cruel, at least not in her own mind, but she operated from such deeply ingrained assumptions about worth and value that her judgments felt natural and unquestionable to those who'd grown up under her influence. David had learned to navigate his mother's expectations through a combination of achievement and avoidance. His successful career as a senior project manager at a regional engineering firm provided him with professional credibility that Margaret could proudly display to her social circle, while his naturally diplomatic personality allowed him to sidestep most direct confrontations about her more problematic behaviors. "Dad, why does Grandma Maggie always say things that make people feel bad?" Emma asked suddenly, looking up from her multiplication problems with the kind of directness that children employed when adults thought they weren't paying attention. David's pen stopped moving across the paper where he'd been checking her work. The question clearly caught him off guard, though not because it was unexpected. Emma had been processing Margaret's criticism for days, and it was inevitable that she'd eventually seek clarity about family dynamics that confused and hurt her. "Grandma Maggie doesn't mean to make people feel bad," David replied carefully, employing the kind of diplomatic language he'd perfected over years of managing his mother's impact on family relationships. "She just has very high standards for everything, and sometimes she expresses them in ways that can sound harsh." Emma considered this explanation with the serious expression she wore when working through complex problems. But why does having high standards mean being mean about other people's work? The question was devastatingly perceptive, cutting straight to the heart of Margaret's behavior patterns in ways that adult family members had been dancing around for years. David looked at me helplessly, recognizing that his usual approach of gentle deflection wasn't going to satisfy Emma's need for genuine understanding. Sometimes adults get confused about the difference between wanting excellence and being excellent. "To others," I offered, settling into the chair beside Emma. "Grandma Maggie grew up believing that pointing out imperfections was the same as helping people improve, but that's not always true." "It made me not want to bake anymore," Emma admitted, quietly, the words carrying far more weight than her small voice suggested. "For 2 whole days, I didn't even want to look at my recipe books because I kept thinking about how she said my cake was amateur and rustic." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Margaret's casual cruelty had accomplished exactly what I'd feared most, temporarily extinguishing Emma's passion for the thing that brought her the greatest joy and sense of achievement. Even if the damage proved temporary, the fact that an adult's thoughtless words could derail a child's creative confidence demonstrated the real power dynamics at play in our family structure. David reached over and squeezed Emma's hand gently. "Em, you're one of the most talented bakers I've ever seen. including the professionals on those cooking shows you watch. Grandma Maggie's opinion doesn't change that fact. But she's a grown-up, Emma replied with 8-year-old logic. Grown-ups know more than kids about most things. Not about everything, I said firmly. Adults can be wrong about important things, especially when they don't take time to really understand what they're looking at. Your cake was absolutely beautiful, and the fact that you made it with love and careful attention made it even more special. As we finished homework and moved through the evening routine of dinner preparation and cleanup, I found myself observing our family dynamics. With new clarity, David's conflict avoidance, while understandable given his upbringing, had inadvertently created space for Margaret's judgments to go unchallenged. Emma's natural deference to adult authority meant she was particularly vulnerable to criticism from family members she'd been taught to respect. Meanwhile, my own response patterns had evolved around accommodating Margaret's need for control rather than establishing clear boundaries about acceptable treatment of my daughter. The combination had created a perfect storm where Emma's extraordinary talents were vulnerable to dismissal by the one family member whose approval seemed to matter most to the adults around her. Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed with her latest library book about famous pastry chefs, David and I sat in our small living room discussing the invitation from Isabella Chen. The opportunity was remarkable, but it also represented a direct challenge to the family dynamics that had kept peace at the cost of authentic recognition. If Emma competes and does well, it's going to create problems with my mother, David said, stating the obvious conclusion we'd both been avoiding. She'll see it as a direct contradiction of her assessment, and she doesn't handle being wrong about things gracefully. I curled up beside him on our comfortable but worn couch, the kind of practical furniture that reflected our middle-class priorities and budget. Our living room was cozy rather than impressive, decorated with Emma's artwork and family photos rather than the carefully curated design elements that filled Margaret's showcase home. Your mother's comfort level can't be the primary factor in decisions about Emma's future, I replied gently but firmly. If Emma wants to compete and has the talent to succeed, we need to support her regardless of how Margaret might react. David nodded, though I could see the tension in his shoulders that always appeared when family loyalty and practical wisdom pulled him in different directions. I know you're right. It's just complicated when family relationships are involved. It's only complicated because we've been prioritizing Margaret's feelings over Emma's needs, I pointed out, surprised by my own directness. Emma is 8 years old, and she's already developing sophisticated skills that professional chefs recognize as exceptional. She deserves to have those abilities nurtured and celebrated, not dismissed as amateur efforts. The conversation continued, past midnight as we worked through the practical and emotional implications of Emma's potential participation in the Junior Baking Championship. David's concerns about family harmony were legitimate, but they paled in comparison to the long-term impact of teaching Emma that her extraordinary talents should be hidden to avoid making others uncomfortable. By morning, we'd reached a decision that felt both exciting and terrifying. We would tell Emma about the competition invitation and let her choose whether she wanted to participate. If she decided to compete, we would support her completely regardless of the social complications that might follow. Emma's reaction to the news was everything I'd hoped for and feared. Her face lit up with pure joy at the recognition from professional bakers, but I also caught the flicker of uncertainty that Margaret's criticism had planted in her developing sense of self-worth. They really think I'm good enough to compete with other kids who've been baking longer? She asked, needing reassurance that this wasn't charity or misguided adult encouragement. Emma, Isabella Chen doesn't waste time on politeness when it comes to baking. She invited you because she and Chef Antoine Dubois believe you have genuine talent that deserves serious recognition and development opportunities. The explanation seemed to satisfy Emma's need for authentic validation rather than empty praise. She spent the rest of the morning sketching possible competition entries and researching advanced techniques, her natural enthusiasm overriding the doubts that Margaret's words had temporarily created. As I watched Emma dive back into her passion with renewed energy, I realized that the competition itself was secondary to what it represented. For the first time since Margaret's cruel assessment, Emma was allowing herself to believe again in her own extraordinary abilities. That restoration of confidence was worth whatever family drama might follow. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly word would spread through Riverside Heights' tight-knit community, or how Margaret would react when she learned that the granddaughter she'd dismissed as an amateur baker had been personally invited to compete at the most prestigious culinary event in the region. The phone call came 2 days later, Margaret's voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that indicated she'd had time to think about the situation and work herself into a state of righteous indignation. "Sarah, I think we need to discuss this baking competition situation before things get out of hand." Margaret's call came at 7 in the morning, which was typical of her approach to conversations she considered urgent. She operated under the assumption that everyone else's schedule should accommodate her need for immediate resolution of issues that concerned her, regardless of how those issues might affect other people's daily routines. "I've been hearing from several people that Emma is planning to enter some kind of professional baking competition," she began without preamble, her tone carrying the same disapproving weight she'd used when discussing Emma's birthday cake. "Honestly, Sarah, I'm concerned about the message this sends." I glanced toward the kitchen where Emma sat eating breakfast and reviewing her recipe notebook, completely absorbed in planning potential competition entries. She'd been up since 6, inspired by dreams of sugar work and artistic presentations that had left her too excited to sleep. The contrast between her pure enthusiasm and Margaret's immediate focus on social implications felt stark and telling. "The message it sends is that Emma is a remarkably talented young baker whose abilities have been recognized by professional chefs," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the familiar tightness in my chest that Margaret's criticism always produced. "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Margaret's voice sharpened with the kind of impatience she displayed when she felt her wisdom wasn't being properly appreciated. "Emma is 8 years old. Putting her in competition with older children sets her up for disappointment and humiliation. More importantly, it creates unrealistic expectations about her future that could be damaging in the long run." The argument was crafted with Margaret's usual skill for presenting personal preferences as child welfare concerns. She'd perfected this approach over the years, framing her need for control as protection for family members who couldn't see potential dangers that her superior experience allowed her to recognize. "Margaret, Emma was personally invited to participate by Isabella Chen after professional chefs saw videos of her work. This isn't a case of pushy parents forcing a child into inappropriate competition. This is recognition of genuine, exceptional ability." "Videos posted where anyone could see them?" Margaret's disapproval deepened. "Sarah, you've been putting Emma's activities on social media? That's exactly the kind of attention-seeking behavior that concerns me." The accusation stung because it deliberately mischaracterized my careful documentation of Emma's progress as vanity-driven social media performance. I'd been thoughtful about sharing Emma's achievements, focusing on technique and education rather than personal promotion. But Margaret's interpretation made my support sound shallow and self-serving. "I've been documenting Emma's learning process because she's developing skills at an extraordinary rate. The videos help other young bakers learn advanced techniques, and they've connected Emma with a community of people who understand and appreciate what she's accomplishing." "What she's accomplishing is getting ahead of herself," Margaret replied with finality. "Emma needs to focus on age-appropriate activities instead of trying to impress adults with skills she hasn't properly mastered. This competition idea is going to end badly, and everyone will see it happen." The prediction felt less like concern and more like a threat, as if Margaret was already planning to ensure that Emma's failure would validate her assessment of the situation. The underlying message was clear. Stepping outside Margaret's definition of appropriate childhood activities was not just unwise but inevitably doomed to public embarrassment. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, But David and I have decided to support Emma's participation if she chooses to compete. She has extraordinary talent that deserves serious development opportunities. The silence that followed carried weight, Margaret's way of communicating displeasure when direct argument hadn't achieved her desired outcome. When she finally spoke again, her tone had shifted to the kind of formal politeness she used when family members had disappointed her. Beyond immediate forgiveness, "Well, I suppose you'll do what you think is best, though I hope you'll reconsider before it's too late to withdraw gracefully. Some lessons are best learned privately rather than in front of an audience." After the call ended, I stood in my kitchen feeling the familiar combination of frustration and self-doubt that Margaret's interactions always produced. Her ability to transform confidence into uncertainty with a few carefully chosen words was remarkable in its consistency and devastating in its impact. Emma looked up from her notebook, sensing the shift in atmosphere even though she'd only heard my side of the conversation. "Was that Grandma Maggie? Is she mad about the competition?" The question forced me to choose between protecting Emma from adult complications and preparing her for the reality of family dynamics that would surround her participation. At 8 years old, she was still young enough to believe that family members naturally supported each other's dreams, and part of me wanted to preserve that innocence as long as possible. "Grandma Maggie is worried that the competition might be too advanced for someone your age," I explained, trying to present Margaret's opposition in the most generous possible terms. "She doesn't want you to be disappointed if things don't go perfectly." Emma considered this with the thoughtful expression she wore when processing complex information. "But Isabella and Chef Antoine think I'm ready, right? They know more about baking competitions than Grandma Maggie does." The logic was unassailable, but it also highlighted the fundamental problem with Margaret's approach to family authority. She expected her opinions to carry more weight than those of people with actual expertise in relevant fields, simply because her family position entitled her to deference on all matters affecting family members. "That's true," I agreed. "Sometimes people disagree about what's best, even when they care about the same person." As the day progressed, I found myself thinking about the pattern of systematic undervaluation that had characterized Margaret's treatment of Emma's interests from the beginning. It wasn't limited to baking, though that had become the most visible arena of conflict. Margaret consistently responded to Emma's enthusiasms and achievements with subtle dismissals that chipped away at her confidence while appearing to offer concerned guidance. When Emma had taught herself to read before kindergarten, Margaret had worried about her becoming too academic and missing out on normal childhood experiences. When Emma's teacher recommended her for the gifted program, Margaret had suggested that advanced classes might make her feel different from other children in unhealthy ways. When Emma had won the school science fair with a project about molecular gastronomy, Margaret had commented that it seemed awfully complicated for someone so young. The pattern was consistent and insidious. Every achievement was reframed as potential problem. Every sign of exceptional ability was presented as cause for concern rather than celebration. Margaret's approach created a family dynamic where Emma's extraordinary talents were treated as aberrations to be managed rather than gifts to be nurtured. David had grown up under similar scrutiny, and I could see how it had shaped his adult personality in both positive and challenging ways. His diplomatic skills and conflict avoidance had served him well professionally, but they'd also created a default setting of accommodation that sometimes prevented him from advocating strongly for people and principles he cared about. "I think we need to have a serious conversation about how we handle my mother's opinions going forward," David said that evening after Emma had gone to bed. Her reaction to the competition invitation was pretty telling. I looked up from the competition registration forms I'd been reviewing, surprised by the unusually direct acknowledgement of problematic family dynamics. David typically preferred to handle Margaret's behavior through subtle maneuvering rather than open discussion of her impact on family decisions. "What do you mean?" "I mean that she's more concerned about being right about Emma's abilities than she is about Emma's actual well-being or development. The way she immediately jumped to Predicting failure and public embarrassment says more about her need to be validated than her worry about Emma being disappointed. The observation was both accurate and significant coming from David, who'd spent years carefully avoiding direct criticism of his mother's behavior patterns. His willingness to name the problem suggested that Margaret's recent actions had finally crossed a line that even his diplomatic tolerance couldn't accommodate. "So what do we do about it?" I asked, genuinely curious about how he thought we should navigate the increasingly apparent conflict between supporting Emma and maintaining family harmony. "We support Emma completely, and we let Mom deal with her own reactions to whatever happens. Emma's 8 years old, and she has extraordinary talent that deserves every opportunity we can provide. Mom's comfort with that reality is her responsibility, not ours." The declaration felt like a fundamental shift in David's approach to family dynamics, a recognition that protecting Emma's potential was more important than protecting Margaret's feelings. It also suggested that he'd been observing and processing Margaret's behavior patterns for longer than I'd realized, building toward conclusions that aligned with my own growing concerns. As we finished completing Emma's competition registration that night, I felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about what we were setting in motion. The competition itself was just the beginning, the first public demonstration of abilities that Margaret and others had consistently undervalued and dismissed. Emma's success, which I had no doubt would be substantial, would force a reckoning with years of systematic dismissal disguised as concerned guidance. The question wasn't whether Emma was ready for that level of recognition. It was whether our family relationships could survive the revelation of just how wrong Margaret's assessments had been. The call from Rebecca Stone came on a Tuesday morning while I was folding laundry and half listening to Emma practice her presentation skills in the kitchen. Rebecca was the region's most influential food blogger, someone whose reviews could make or break restaurants and whose endorsements carried significant weight in culinary circles throughout the tri-state area. "Sarah Martinez, this is Rebecca Stone from Riverside Foodie. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I've been following your daughter's baking videos for several weeks now, and I'm absolutely fascinated by what I'm seeing." I nearly dropped the basket of clothes I was carrying. Rebecca Stone knew who Emma was. More importantly, she'd been following Emma's progress closely enough to track her development over multiple weeks. The implications were staggering, particularly coming so soon after Isabella Chen's competition invitation. "I'm sorry, I'm a bit surprised," I managed, settling into a chair at my kitchen table where I could see Emma carefully practicing her knife skills while preparing ingredients for her latest recipe experiment. "How did you discover Emma's videos?" "Through a network of food professionals who share interesting content with each other. Your daughter's techniques and intuitive understanding of flavor principles have been generating quite a bit of discussion among people who know advanced baking when they see it." Rebecca's words confirmed what I'd been suspecting, but hadn't dared to believe completely. Emma's abilities weren't just impressive for her age, they were genuinely remarkable by professional standards. The recognition from established food industry figures validated my growing conviction that Emma possessed the kind of rare natural talent that appeared perhaps once in a generation. I'm actually calling because I'd like to feature Emma in a special series I'm planning about exceptional young culinary talents in our region. The piece would include an interview, a demonstration of her techniques, and discussion of her creative process and inspiration. The opportunity was extraordinary, potentially connecting Emma with an audience of serious food enthusiasts who would appreciate her work for its technical merit rather than its novelty value. But it also represented another step toward the kind of public recognition that would make Margaret's dismissive assessment increasingly difficult to maintain. That sounds wonderful, though I'd want to discuss it with Emma and make sure she's comfortable with the format and expectations. Of course. Actually, there's another reason I wanted to speak with you directly. I understand Emma has been invited to participate in the junior division of the annual Riverside Baking Championship. News traveled fast in Riverside Heights food community. apparently faster than I'd anticipated. Emma's invitation had been extended less than a week ago, but already it was generating discussion among people who followed regional culinary competitions closely. Yes, Isabella Chen and Chef Antoine Dubois personally invited her after seeing some of her work. Sarah, I want you to understand something important. I've been covering food competitions for over a decade, and I've never seen a junior division participant generate this level of advance interest from professional judges and industry figures. People are genuinely excited to see what Emma creates under competition conditions. The revelation was both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. Emma was about to compete in her first formal baking competition, and already she had an audience of food professionals whose expectations were based on her demonstrated abilities rather than her age. The pressure could have been intimidating, but it also represented the kind of serious recognition that Emma's talents deserved. Would you be interested in covering her competition experience for your blog? Obviously, with appropriate focus on the educational and inspirational aspects rather than creating additional pressure. Actually, that's exactly what I was hoping to discuss. I'd like to document Emma's preparation process, her competition experience, and whatever results emerge. The story has potential to inspire other young people who might have similar talents but haven't found opportunities to develop them. As we talked through the logistics of Rebecca's proposed coverage, Emma looked up from her ingredient preparation with curious interest. She'd been listening to enough of the conversation to understand that someone wanted to write about her baking, though the full implications probably weren't clear to her 8-year-old perspective. "Mama, is someone going to put my baking in a magazine?" she asked after I'd finished the call with Rebecca. "Even better, sweetheart. Rebecca Stone is a very important food writer, and she wants to tell people about your amazing talents and your competition experience. She thinks other kids who love baking might be inspired by your story." Emma's face lit up with the kind of pure joy that came from having her passion recognized and validated by people who truly understood what they were seeing. This wasn't polite adult encouragement or family loyalty. It was professional acknowledgement of genuine, exceptional ability. "Does that mean people will see that I'm not just amateur and rustic?" she asked, the question revealing how deeply Margaret's words had affected her self-perception despite our efforts to counteract their impact. "Emma, you were never amateur or rustic. You're an exceptionally talented young baker whose work is being recognized by some of the most respected food professionals in our region. Grandma Maggie was wrong about your abilities, and soon lots of people will be able to see that for themselves." The conversation marked a turning point in Emma's understanding of her own place in the larger world of baking and culinary arts. For months, she'd been developing her skills in the relatively private environment of our home kitchen, with feedback primarily from family members and online communities. Now, she was beginning to understand that her abilities had attracted attention from established professionals who evaluated work based on objective standards rather than personal relationships. That afternoon, while Emma practiced advanced piping techniques for her competition entry, I found myself reflecting on the network of recognition and support that had been developing around her talents without our family's full awareness. Isabella Chen, Chef Antoine Dubois, Rebecca Stone, and apparently numerous other food industry figures had been following Emma's progress and discussing her potential among themselves. The secret recognition felt surreal but also validating in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. For so long, I'd wondered if my maternal pride was causing me to overestimate Emma's abilities or see exceptional talent where others might see normal childhood creativity. The professional interest in Emma's work confirmed that her skills were genuinely remarkable by objective standards. More importantly, it meant that Emma's upcoming competition performance would be witnessed by people who understood what they were seeing and could appreciate the technical sophistication behind work that others might dismiss as cute childhood efforts. The phone rang again that evening, this time displaying a number I didn't recognize with a New York area code. Emma was upstairs taking her bath, and David was reviewing some project specifications at the kitchen table when I answered cautiously. "Ms. Martinez? This is Patricia Williams from the Food Network. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time." I nearly dropped the phone. The Food Network was calling our house, asking to speak with me about Emma. The surreal quality of recent events seemed to be escalating at a pace that left me struggling to process each new development before the next one arrived. "I'm calling because your daughter Emma has come to our attention through several industry contacts who've been following her work. We're always interested in exceptional young talent, and frankly, the buzz around Emma's abilities has been remarkable." Patricia's voice carried the kind of professional enthusiasm that suggested genuine interest rather than polite courtesy. The Food Network didn't waste time on conversations that weren't likely to lead somewhere significant, which meant Emma's reputation in culinary circles had reached levels I hadn't fully comprehended. "We're planning a special segment for our Junior Chef Spotlight series, featuring young culinary talents from across the country. Emma's combination of technical skill and creative innovation makes her exactly the kind of inspiring story we like to share with our audience." As Patricia explained the potential television appearance, I found myself torn between excitement and concern. The opportunity was extraordinary, potentially connecting Emma with millions of viewers who shared her passion for baking and culinary creativity. But it also represented a level of public exposure that would make Margaret's criticisms seem quaint by comparison. The segment would involve filming Emma in her home kitchen, demonstrating some of her signature techniques and discussing her creative process. We'd also cover her competition experience at the Riverside Baking Championship, assuming she chooses to participate. The timeline was ambitious but feasible, with filming scheduled for the week following the competition to capture both Emma's preparation process and her actual competitive performance. The Food Network's interest in documenting her competition experience suggested they expected her to perform well enough to create compelling television content. "Ms. Martinez, I want to be completely transparent about why we're interested in Emma specifically. Our producers have reviewed dozens of young baker submissions over the past year, but Emma's work demonstrates a level of intuitive understanding that's genuinely rare. She doesn't just follow recipes well, she understands the science behind baking in ways that allow her to innovate successfully." The assessment aligned perfectly with my own observations of Emma's development over the past 2 years. She'd moved beyond simple recipe execution to genuine creative experimentation, developing original flavor combinations and techniques through systematic testing and refinement. Her notebook was filled with detailed observations about how different ingredients interacted and how minor modifications could dramatically improve final results. Would this involve any significant disruption to Emma's normal routine or school schedule? I asked, thinking practically about the logistics of accommodating television production around an 8-year-old's daily life. We're experienced working with young talent, so we structure filming around their schedules and comfort levels. Typically, we spend 2 or 3 days capturing content, but we work in short segments that don't overwhelm younger participants. As the conversation continued, I began to understand that Emma's recognition in professional culinary circles extended far beyond what I'd realized. The Food Network's interest wasn't charity or novelty programming, it was serious recognition of exceptional talent that had attracted attention from multiple industry figures independently. After the call ended, I sat in my kitchen trying to process the magnitude of what was developing around Emma's abilities. 3 professional opportunities had emerged within a single week, each representing validation from different sectors of the food industry. Isabella Chen's competition invitation, Rebecca Stone's feature article, and now the Food Network's television segment created a convergence of recognition that felt almost overwhelming in its scope and timing. David looked up from his work with obvious curiosity about the lengthy phone conversation I'd just concluded. More food industry people interested in Emma? The Food Network wants to feature her in a national television segment about exceptional young culinary talent. His pen stopped moving across the project specifications as he processed this information. National television, as in millions, of viewers seeing Emma demonstrate her techniques and discuss her creative process. I nodded, still somewhat stunned by the rapid escalation of professional interest in Emma's work. Patricia Williams, the producer I spoke with, said Emma's abilities are genuinely rare and that they've been getting inquiries about her from multiple industry contacts. David set his papers aside and gave me his full attention, recognizing that we were discussing developments that would significantly impact our family's future, regardless of how we chose to handle them. How do you feel about this level of public exposure for Emma? The question was complex because it forced me to balance Emma's extraordinary opportunities against legitimate concerns about childhood privacy and normal development. At 8 years old, she was still forming her sense of identity and self-worth, and massive public attention could potentially create pressures that might interfere with healthy emotional growth. I feel like Emma deserves every opportunity to develop her talents and receive recognition for her achievements, I replied carefully. But I also want to make sure we're protecting her childhood and not creating unrealistic pressures or expectations. What does Emma think about all this? Attention? That was perhaps the most important question, and one I'd been considering carefully as each new opportunity emerged. Emma's reaction to professional recognition had been consistently positive, but she also hadn't fully grasped the scope of what was developing around her work. She's excited about people recognizing her baking skills, and she seems to understand that food professionals think she's genuinely talented rather than just cute for her age. But I don't think she fully comprehends what national television exposure would mean. We spent the next hour discussing the practical and emotional implications of Emma's emerging opportunities. The competition, the blog coverage, and the television segment each carried potential benefits and risks that needed careful evaluation. Most importantly, we needed to ensure that Emma remained at the center of these decisions, with her comfort level and genuine interests guiding our choices rather than external pressures or opportunities. When Emma came downstairs in her pajamas, for our usual bedtime story routine, we decided to discuss the television opportunity with her in age-appropriate terms. She deserved to understand what was being offered and to participate in decisions that would significantly affect her life. Remember how we talked about some important food people recognizing your baking talents? I began as she settled beside me on the couch with her favorite book about a mouse who wanted to become a chef. Like Isabella from the Fancy Bakery and the lady who writes about restaurants? Exactly. Well, some people from the Food Network, which is a television channel about cooking, have heard about your baking, and they'd like to make a show about your talents. Emma's eyes widened with interest and excitement. Like the cooking shows we watched together? Would I be on TV like Chef Marcus and Chef Sarah? It would be similar, but focused specifically on young bakers like you who have exceptional abilities. They'd film you baking in our kitchen and talking about how you create your recipes and decorations. The explanation seemed to satisfy Emma's curiosity, while providing enough information for her to understand the opportunity's significance. She considered the prospect with the same thoughtful attention she applied to complex baking challenges. Would lots of people see it? Like, people who don't know me? Yes, the Food Network has millions of viewers across the country. People who love baking and cooking would see your segment and learn about your techniques and creative ideas. Emma absorbed this information quietly, her 8-year-old mind working through implications that adults might not immediately consider. Would they see that my baking is really good, not amateur like Grandma Maggie said? The question revealed that Margaret's dismissive comments continued to influence Emma's self-perception, despite our efforts to counteract their impact. Professional recognition was becoming not just about opportunities for development, but about restoring confidence that had been damaged by thoughtless criticism from someone Emma had been taught to respect. Emma, everyone who sees your work on television would understand immediately that you're an exceptionally talented baker. The food. Network doesn't feature people unless their abilities are genuinely remarkable by professional standards. This seemed to satisfy Emma's need for validation, while helping her understand the significance of the recognition she was receiving. We agreed to proceed with the television opportunity, with the understanding that Emma could change her mind at any point if she became uncomfortable with the attention or pressure. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, surrounded by her collection of cookbooks and recipe notebooks, she looked up at me with an expression of wonder and excitement that hadn't dimmed despite the recent challenges with Margaret's criticism. "Mama, do you think other kids who love baking will see my TV show and feel inspired to try harder recipes?" The question revealed Emma's natural inclination toward encouraging others rather than simply seeking personal recognition. Even at 8 years old, she understood that her abilities carried potential responsibility to help other young people discover and develop their own talents. "I think lots of kids will see your segment and realize that age doesn't have to limit what they can accomplish if they're willing to work hard and practice consistently." Emma smiled and settled into her pillows, clearly pleased with the idea that her recognition might help other children pursue their own culinary interests. As I turned off her bedroom light, I reflected on how the professional validation Emma was receiving served multiple purposes beyond simple recognition of her abilities. The competition invitation, blog coverage, and television segment were creating a documented record of Emma's exceptional talents that would be difficult for anyone to dismiss or minimize. More importantly, they were connecting Emma with a community of people who understood and appreciated serious culinary work, providing her with mentorship and inspiration that would support her continued development. Margaret's cruel assessment at the birthday party had been intended to diminish Emma's confidence and redirect her interests toward more conventional childhood activities. Instead, it had motivated me to seek out professional evaluation of Emma's abilities, leading to recognition that validated everything I'd observed about her extraordinary potential. The irony was perfect in its completeness. Margaret's dismissive prediction that Emma's work would never meet professional standards had directly prompted the professional recognition that proved her assessment completely wrong. Her attempt to crush Emma's dreams had instead catalyzed their realization in ways more spectacular than I could have imagined. As the week progressed and news of Emma's upcoming opportunities spread through Riverside Heights' tight-knit community, I began to notice subtle changes in how people responded to our family. Emma's teachers mentioned her achievements with obvious pride. Neighbors asked thoughtful questions about her competition preparation, and other parents began seeking advice about nurturing their own children's culinary interests. The shift in community perception was gratifying, but it also made Margaret's continued silence on the subject increasingly conspicuous. She'd made no contact since her disapproving phone call about the competition, despite the fact that news of Emma's television appearance and blog feature had certainly reached her through multiple social channels. David's brother Tyler finally broke the family communication silence with a phone call on Thursday evening. Unlike Margaret's controlled criticism, Tyler's tone carried genuine excitement and family pride. "Dave, I just heard through Mom's Bridge Club that Emma's going to be on the Food Network. Is that actually true? Or is the Riverside Heights Gossip Network exaggerating again?" David confirmed the television opportunity while explaining the broader context of professional recognition that Emma had been receiving. Tyler's reaction was everything Margaret's should have been. Enthusiastic celebration of family achievement mixed with obvious pride in Emma's exceptional abilities. "That's incredible. I mean, I knew Emma was talented from watching her videos, but national television recognition suggests she's operating at a completely different level than I realized." The conversation continued for nearly an hour as Tyler asked detailed questions about Emma's preparation process, her competition strategy, and the timeline for various media opportunities. His genuine interest and informed questions demonstrated the kind of family support that Emma deserved to receive from all her relatives. "You know, Mom's been pretty quiet about all this," Tyler finally acknowledged. addressing the elephant in the room that David had been carefully avoiding. "I think she's processing the fact that her assessment of Emma's abilities was pretty dramatically wrong." The diplomatic phrasing was typical of Tyler's approach to family dynamics, but it also represented the first acknowledgement from another family member that Margaret's criticism had been inappropriate and inaccurate. David's relief at having his brother's support was visible, even through the phone conversation. "It's been challenging," David admitted. "Emma was really hurt by Mom's comments at the birthday party, and now she's receiving exactly the kind of professional recognition that contradicts everything Mom said about her work being amateur." Tyler was quiet for a moment before responding. "Maybe this will be good for Mom in the long run. She's gotten pretty comfortable making judgments about things she doesn't really understand, and having Emma's success be so publicly documented might help her develop more humility about her assessments." The conversation ended on a note of family solidarity that felt like the first genuinely positive development in our extended family relationships since Margaret's birthday party disaster. Tyler's support provided David with an ally within his own family, someone who could offer perspective and validation without the complicated history that made Margaret's opinion so difficult to navigate. As we prepared for Emma's competition weekend, which was now just 10 days away, I found myself marveling at how dramatically our family's circumstances had shifted in such a short period. Emma had gone from having her abilities dismissed by her grandmother to receiving national television recognition for exceptional talent. The validation was sweet, but more importantly, it was providing Emma with opportunities and connections that would support her continued development, regardless of family dynamics. The secret recognition Emma had been receiving in professional culinary circles was about to become very public, creating a permanent record of achievement that would be impossible for anyone to minimize or explain away. Margaret's prediction of inevitable failure and embarrassment was about to be replaced by documented evidence of exceptional success at the highest levels of competitive evaluation. The transformation felt complete in ways I hadn't fully anticipated, not just in Emma's opportunities, but in our family's understanding of her extraordinary potential and our responsibility to nurture it regardless of external opinions or social pressures. Margaret's cruel assessment had been intended as the final word on Emma's abilities, the voice of adult wisdom correcting childhood delusions of talent. Instead, it had become the catalyst for recognition that exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Validation from the very professional community that Margaret had suggested would never take Emma's work seriously. The irony was perfect, but more importantly, it was justice for an 8-year-old girl whose only crime had been believing in her own extraordinary abilities and working tirelessly to develop them despite adult skepticism and dismissal. Emma's moment of vindication was approaching, and it would be witnessed by millions of people who understood exactly what they were seeing when they watched her demonstrate the skills that Margaret had so casually dismissed as amateur and rustic. The taste of karma was going to be particularly sweet, served alongside Emma's perfectly executed competition entries and broadcast to a national audience of food enthusiasts who recognized genuine talent when they encountered it. The countdown to competition weekend had begun, and with it, the final phase of a transformation that would permanently alter how our family understood talent, recognition, and the responsibility that came with extraordinary gifts. Emma was ready for her moment, and the world was ready to discover what professional chefs had already recognized as something truly special in the realm of culinary arts. The morning of the annual Riverside Baking Championship dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Emma had been awake since 5:30, not from nerves, but from pure excitement that had her reviewing her competition notes and mentally rehearsing her techniques. One final time. I found her in the kitchen at 6, fully dressed in her lucky yellow dress, carefully organizing her tools and ingredients with the methodical precision of a professional chef preparing for service. "Ready for this, sweetheart?" I asked, rapping, my arms around her small shoulders as she double-checked her recipe cards for the third time. "I've been ready for weeks, Mama. I just want to show everyone what I can really do when I have the right kitchen and all the time I need." The confidence in her voice was absolute, unmarked by the doubt that Margaret's criticism had temporarily planted. Professional recognition from Isabella Chen, Chef Antoine Dubois, Rebecca Stone, and the Food Network had restored Emma's faith in her abilities, while providing her with mentorship that had elevated her skills even further during the weeks of preparation. We arrived at the Riverside Community Center to find the parking lot already bustling with activity. Television crews were setting up equipment, food bloggers were interviewing early arrivals, and competitors of all ages were unloading their supplies with the focused intensity of athletes preparing for important competition. The energy was electric, crackling with the kind of anticipation that surrounded events where genuine talent would be tested and recognized. Emma's eyes widened as we entered the main hall, which had been transformed into a sophisticated competition kitchen with 12 individual stations equipped with professional-grade ovens, mixers, and every tool a serious baker could require. The setup rivaled what we'd seen on Emma's favorite television cooking shows, complete with cameras positioned to capture every moment of the creative process. Competitors, welcome to the inaugural junior division of the annual Riverside Baking Championship! Isabella Chen's voice carried across the room with authority and warmth as she addressed the 12 young bakers who'd been selected to participate. "You're here because food professionals have recognized exceptional talent in your work, and today you'll have the opportunity to demonstrate those abilities under competition conditions." Emma took her place at Station 7, her small hands moving with practiced efficiency as she arranged her tools and ingredients according to the organizational system we'd developed during weeks of preparation. Around her, the other competitors ranged in age from 8 to 12, each carrying themselves with the confident bearing of young people who'd already proven their abilities in preliminary evaluations. The judging panel took their positions. At the front of the room, an impressive assembly of culinary expertise that included Isabella, Chef Antoine Dubois, the executive pastry chef from the city's most acclaimed restaurant, and surprisingly, Margaret's friend Vernon Walsh, who owned a successful catering company and apparently served as a guest judge for major regional competitions. The irony of Margaret's social circle evaluating Emma's work wasn't lost on me, though I doubted Vernon had made the connection between the competitor and his friend's dismissive granddaughter. "Your first challenge," Isabella announced, "is a technical test that will evaluate your fundamental skills and ability to execute classic techniques with personal innovation. You'll prepare a French croquembouche, but you're required to incorporate at least 3 elements that reflect your individual style and creativity." The assignment was ambitious even for adult bakers, requiring mastery of choux pastry, caramel work, and architectural construction, while leaving room for artistic interpretation. Emma's face lit up with excitement rather than concern, her mind already racing through the modifications she'd planned for exactly this type of challenge. For the next 3 hours, I watched my 8-year-old daughter work with the focused intensity of a master craftsperson. Her choux pastry emerged from the oven perfectly golden and hollow. Her crème pâtissière was silky and flavorful, and her caramel reached precise temperature points that she gauged by sound and appearance rather than relying solely on thermometer readings. But most impressive was her innovative approach to assembly, creating a croquembouche that spiraled elegantly upward while incorporating delicate spun sugarwork and candied flowers that elevated the classic design into something entirely original. The judges moved from station to station, tasting and evaluating each competitor's work with serious professional attention. When they reached Emma's creation, I watched their expressions carefully, noting the surprise and appreciation that crossed their faces as they examined her technical execution and creative modifications. "Exceptional structural integrity," Chef Antoine murmured to Isabella, his voice carrying clearly enough for nearby spectators to hear. "The flavor balance is sophisticated, and the artistic elements show genuine understanding of advanced techniques." Vernon Walsh nodded in agreement, apparently unaware that he was evaluating work created by the granddaughter his friend Margaret had dismissed as amateur just weeks earlier. This demonstrates professional-level skill combined with impressive creativity. Whoever this young baker is, they have remarkable potential. Emma stood beside her creation with quiet pride, accepting the judge's praise with the gracious composure she'd learned from watching professional chefs handle evaluation and criticism. There was no arrogance in her bearing, just satisfaction at having executed her vision successfully under challenging conditions. The second challenge focused on artistic presentation and original design, requiring competitors to create an elaborate decorated cake that told a personal story through visual elements. Emma had chosen to represent her journey from home baker to competitive recognition, creating a 3-tier masterpiece that showcased her technical progression through increasingly sophisticated decorative techniques on each level. The bottom tier featured buttercream flowers similar to those on her birthday cake for Margaret, but executed with the refined skill she'd developed through months of practice and professional guidance. The middle tier displayed fondant work and sugarcraft that demonstrated her mastery of advanced techniques, while the top tier incorporated molecular gastronomy elements she'd learned from her science fair project, creating edible crystals that caught the light like precious gems. As judges evaluated this round, I noticed Margaret entering the spectator area with David's father Richard and several other family members. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the moment when she realized that the young competitor receiving enthusiastic praise from professional judges was her own granddaughter, the child whose work she'd dismissed so cruelly just weeks earlier. The judges' comments on Emma's artistic challenge were even more effusive than their technical evaluation. This represents not just exceptional skill for someone so young, but genuine artistic vision that connects personal narrative with sophisticated execution, Isabella announced to the gathered audience. The progression of techniques across the 3 tiers tells a compelling story of growth and development that demonstrates both talent and dedication. Chef Antoine added his own assessment with obvious admiration. In 20 years of judging competitions, I've rarely seen such mature understanding of how visual elements can support narrative structure while maintaining perfect technical execution. This is the work of someone who understands baking as both craft and art form. I glanced toward Margaret, whose face had gone pale as she processed the contradiction between her harsh assessment of Emma's abilities and the professional recognition her granddaughter was receiving from judges whose expertise was unquestionable. The realization that she'd been completely wrong about Emma's potential was playing out in real time, witnessed by hundreds of spectators and documented by multiple cameras. The final challenge required competitors to create an original recipe that showcased their personal style and technical mastery, with complete creative freedom regarding flavor combinations, structural design, and presentation approach. Emma had spent weeks developing her signature creation, a complex dessert that combined molecular gastronomy techniques with classical French pastry methods to create something entirely unique. Her final presentation was a work of art that transcended traditional baking categories. Built on a foundation of perfectly laminated puff pastry, it incorporated layers of innovative flavors including lavender honey mousse, crystallized ginger pearls, and a champagne gelée that shimmered like liquid gold. The visual presentation combined architectural elements with organic flowing lines, creating something that looked as much like sculpture as dessert. When time was called and competitors stepped back from their final creations, the judges began their deliberations with obvious enthusiasm for the exceptional work they were evaluating. The quality across all age groups had exceeded expectations, but even among a field of genuinely talented young bakers, Emma's combination of technical skill, artistic vision, and innovative thinking stood out dramatically. Rebecca Stone approached me during the judging break, her expression reflecting genuine amazement at what she'd witnessed during the competition. "Sarah, I've been covering culinary competitions for over a decade, and I've never seen anything quite like Emma's performance today." She's not just competing at an advanced level for her age, she's demonstrating abilities that would be impressive in adult professional competitions. The validation from someone whose expertise I respected was gratifying, but more importantly, it confirmed that Emma's success wasn't the result of generous evaluation based on her age, but genuine recognition of exceptional ability that transcended traditional competitive categories. As judges prepared to announce results, Isabella Chen addressed the audience with obvious pride in all the young competitors. The level of talent demonstrated here today has been truly extraordinary. These young bakers represent the future of culinary arts, and their creativity and technical skills promise exciting developments in our industry. She paused dramatically before continuing. However, one competitor has demonstrated such exceptional mastery of advanced techniques, combined with artistic vision and innovative thinking, that the judging panel has unanimously selected them as our inaugural Junior Division champion. The silence that followed was electric with anticipation, as spectators waited for the announcement that would recognize exceptional achievement and validate months of preparation and development. Emma Martinez, your work today has been absolutely remarkable. You've shown that age is no barrier to genuine excellence, and your combination of technical skill, creativity, and professional bearing represents everything we hope to discover in this competition. The applause that erupted was thunderous, reflecting the audience's recognition that they had witnessed something truly special. Emma's face glowed with joy and pride as she accepted her trophy and scholarship award, her 8-year-old composure remarkable under such intense attention and celebration. Chef Antoine approached the microphone for additional comments that would prove devastating to Margaret's earlier assessment. I want to emphasize that Emma's victory today was based solely on the exceptional quality of her work. Her technical execution rivals that of professional pastry chefs. Her artistic vision is sophisticated and original, and her innovative approach to flavor and presentation demonstrates genuine mastery of advanced culinary principles. He paused to look directly at Emma with obvious respect and admiration. This young lady represents the kind of rare talent that appears perhaps once in a generation. Her abilities are not impressive for her age, they are impressive by any standard of evaluation. The Food Network cameras captured every moment of Emma's victory, documenting not just her technical achievements, but the grace with which she handled recognition and the obvious passion that drove her pursuit of excellence. The national television audience would see exactly what professional judges had recognized: exceptional talent that transcended age-based expectations and demanded serious recognition. As the formal ceremony concluded and spectators began approaching Emma for congratulations and photographs, I noticed Margaret standing frozen at the edge of the crowd, her face reflecting the full impact of witnessing her granddaughter's triumph. After dismissing her abilities so cruelly weeks earlier, David approached his mother with Emma's trophy in hand, his expression carrying a mixture of pride in his daughter and pointed criticism of Margaret's earlier behavior. "Mom, I'd like you to meet the inaugural Junior Division champion of the annual Riverside Baking Championship, though I believe you've already had the opportunity to sample her work." The reference to Margaret's dismissive comments about Emma's birthday cake was unmistakable, and Margaret's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized that everyone within hearing distance understood the context of David's remark. Her granddaughter's professional recognition had created a permanent record that contradicted every aspect of her harsh assessment. "Emma, sweetheart, congratulations," Margaret managed, her voice strained with the effort of appearing gracious, while processing the magnitude of her error in judgment. "Your competition performance was quite impressive." Emma, displaying the kind of generosity that demonstrated her character alongside her culinary talents, smiled warmly at her grandmother. "Thank you, Grandma Maggie. I've been practicing really hard since your birthday party, trying to make my techniques more professional and less rustic." The gentle reminder of Margaret's cruel words, delivered without malice but with perfect clarity, was perhaps the most devastating response possible. Emma's gracious acknowledgement of the criticism that had motivated her to seek professional recognition transformed Margaret's intended discouragement into inadvertent inspiration for extraordinary achievement. Vernon Walsh approached our family group with obvious curiosity about the connection between his friend Margaret and the competition champion who'd impressed him so thoroughly. "Margaret, you didn't mention that your granddaughter was one of the competitors." Emma's work today was absolutely exceptional, some of the most sophisticated baking I've seen from someone so young. Margaret's discomfort was visible as she struggled to respond to Vernon's enthusiasm without revealing the extent of her earlier dismissal of Emma's abilities. "Yes, Emma is very dedicated to her baking interests." The diplomatic understatement was laughable given the professional recognition Emma had just received, and Vernon's expression suggested he sensed there was more to the story than Margaret was revealing. The social dynamics were becoming increasingly uncomfortable for Margaret, as more of her friends approached to congratulate her on having such an exceptionally talented granddaughter. Isabella Chen joined our conversation with genuine warmth and excitement about Emma's future development opportunities. "Mrs. Thompson, you must be incredibly proud of Emma's achievements. Her abilities are truly remarkable, and the scholarship she's won will provide her with training opportunities that will support her continued growth as a culinary artist." Margaret nodded stiffly, trapped between social expectations that she celebrate Emma's success and her own discomfort with being so dramatically wrong about her granddaughter's potential. The public nature of Emma's triumph made it impossible for Margaret to minimize or dismiss the recognition she was receiving from respected professional figures. As the afternoon progressed and media interviews documented Emma's victory for regional and national coverage, Margaret found herself increasingly isolated as family members and friends celebrated achievements she'd predicted would end in embarrassment and failure. The social cost of her cruel assessment was becoming apparent as people began questioning her judgment and empathy. Rebecca Stone's interview with Emma was particularly powerful, focusing on her creative process, her inspiration, and her advice for other young people who might have similar interests but lack confidence to pursue them seriously. Emma's poise and articulate responses demonstrated not just culinary talent, but the kind of character and intelligence that made her an ideal spokesperson for young people with exceptional abilities. "What would you say to other kids who love baking but maybe feel like adults don't take their work seriously?" Rebecca asked, unknowingly providing Emma with an opportunity to address her own recent experience with dismissive adult attitudes. "I would tell them that if they really love baking and they're willing to work hard to learn proper techniques, there are adults who will recognize their talent and help them develop it," Emma replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes the first adults, you show your work to might not understand what they're seeing, but that doesn't mean you should give up. There are people who know about baking professionally, and they can help you figure out if you have real talent or if you just need more practice." The response was wise beyond her years, reflecting both her recent experience with professional recognition and her understanding that not all adult opinions carried equal weight when it came to evaluating specialized skills and abilities. As evening approached and the competition venue gradually emptied, our family gathered for what should have been a celebration dinner, but felt more like a reckoning with months of accumulated tension and misunderstanding. Margaret's silence was conspicuous as David, Tyler, and other family members praised Emma's achievement and discussed the opportunities that would follow from her competition victory. Finally, as we prepared to leave the restaurant, Margaret approached Emma directly for the first time since the harsh criticism that had started this entire journey toward professional recognition and validation. "Emma, I owe you an apology," she began, her voice carrying genuine humility that I'd never heard from her before. "When I criticized your birthday cake, I was wrong about your abilities, and I spoke without understanding what I was really looking at." Emma listened with the same serious attention she applied to learning new techniques, processing Margaret's words without immediate response. At 8 years old, she was still young enough to forgive easily, but mature enough to recognize the significance of her grandmother's acknowledgement. I said your work was amateur and rustic, but today I watched professional judges recognize it as exceptional and sophisticated. I was wrong, and my criticism was unfair and hurtful. Margaret paused, clearly struggling with the unfamiliar experience of admitting error and seeking forgiveness from someone she'd dismissed so thoughtlessly. I hope you can forgive me for not seeing your extraordinary talent when it was right in front of me. Emma's response was immediate and generous, reflecting the kind of character that made her success even more meaningful. It's okay, Grandma. Maggie. Your words made me sad, but they also made me want to prove that my baking really was good. Maybe if you hadn't said those things, I wouldn't have worked so hard to get better. The gracious acceptance was more than Margaret deserved, but it demonstrated Emma's natural inclination toward forgiveness and her remarkable ability to find positive meaning, even in painful experiences. Her response transformed Margaret's cruel criticism into motivation for growth, reframing the entire conflict in terms of eventual benefit rather than lasting harm. As we drove home that evening, Emma's trophy and scholarship certificate safely secured beside her in the back seat, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment of complete vindication. Margaret's casual dismissal of Emma's abilities had set in motion a series of events that proved her assessment wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Emma had gone from having her work called amateur and rustic to receiving national television recognition and professional acknowledgement of her exceptional abilities. The transformation was complete, documented by multiple media outlets and witnessed by hundreds of people who understood exactly what they had seen. But more importantly than the external validation was Emma's own restored confidence in her abilities and her understanding that adult opinions varied dramatically in their accuracy and value. She'd learned to distinguish between informed professional assessment and uninformed personal prejudice, a lesson that would serve her well throughout her life. The taste of karma had been particularly sweet, served alongside Emma's perfectly executed competition entries, and witnessed by the very person whose cruel words had started this entire journey toward recognition and success. Margaret's humiliation was complete, but Emma's generosity in accepting her apology demonstrated that true victory lay not in revenge, but in the kind of grace that transformed conflict into growth. As we tucked Emma into bed that night, surrounded by her trophy, scholarship certificate, and stack of business cards from food industry professionals who wanted to support her continued development, she looked up at me with eyes that sparkled with satisfaction and excitement about future possibilities. Mama, do you think Grandma Maggie really understands now that my baking isn't just a cute little hobby? I smiled at the question, which perfectly captured the magnitude of the day's transformation. I think everyone understands now, sweetheart, including Grandma Maggie. Emma nodded contentedly and settled into her pillows, clearly pleased with the day's validation, but already thinking ahead to new challenges and opportunities. Her extraordinary abilities had been recognized at the highest levels, her potential validated by people whose expertise was unquestionable, and her future secured through scholarship opportunities that would support continued growth and development. Margaret's cruel assessment had been intended as the final word on Emma's abilities, the voice of adult wisdom correcting childhood delusions of talent. Instead, it had become the catalyst for recognition that exceeded our most optimistic expectations, creating a permanent record of achievement that would be impossible for anyone to minimize or explain away. The war that Margaret had declared with her dismissive words had been won decisively, not through confrontation, but through Emma's exceptional performance under the most demanding professional evaluation possible. The victory was complete, the vindication absolute, and the future bright with possibilities that no one could dismiss or diminish. Emma's moment had arrived, and she had claimed it with grace, skill, and the kind of extraordinary talent that transformed skeptics into believers and critics into supporters. The taste of karma was indeed sweet, best served with a perfectly executed croquembouche and a side of humble pie. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.